Let us pray. You have passed the exam. My work is cut. But how often does this happen? How many times do you go to, especially the ministries in any government entity, or in our parastatals, or in our homes, you don't ask the other person for consent. You go at it. May the grace of our Lord, and right? This happens all the time. But the fact that you have challenged me on that, that is the first exam that you guys have passed. So let's go to consent. Now, consent is a very simple aspect. We complicate it with a lot of mumbo jumbo, but it's a simple thing as when someone voluntarily agrees to something, you approve. You guys keep giving lawyers stick for no apparent reason. So in law, we call it the meeting of the minds. Yani mimi na wewe tumekubaliana. So consent has specific and different definitions across border. There's what lawyers have, there's what doctors have, and there's history to it. There are two types of consent: express and implied. It's a very thin line. Nevertheless, it's still there. And express consent is where we agree, hi, this has to happen, yes, voila, acceptance. Now, implied consent. Let's, in my other life, I'm a biker. And not so long ago, we used to have situations where a biker's got into an accident, right? You pass out. And this person has to be taken to a hospital, probably because you've lost blood. We need to find out which blood, your blood group. And at that time, you're passed out. Do you give express consent? No. Medics will have to make a judgment call on you at that moment, or the first aiders. So for me, that is a classic example of implied consent. Nevertheless, it's something that I would never advise anyone to rely on. Now, this is the boring part about some of these things, the history, and I know lawyers love history. I'll go back to the Bible, the covenant story between those guys we call Israelites and their God. And they came up with this Mosaic covenant. That was the first instances involving originating consent. And the reason why you're going to hear a lot of Bible in this conversation is for a simple thinking that the first instances about intellect and guys having conversations around very many thematic areas, they came from the Bible. Now, in 507 BCE, we had one of the guys we call the father of democracy. And it was a simple thing in Athens. Here we are, we had a monarch. The king of Sparta comes, overthrows the monarch. After overthrowing the monarch, they push their ethos, their behaviors, their culture down the throats of guys in Athens. And that name, it's a difficult name, and coming from deep in Masako, might be quite problematic for me to pronounce it. And he gave up the concept of, look, we need to have a check of the monarch. We need to have a conversations around democracy, about how do we represent, how are our people represented. And that is the first instance of democracy, and the social contract between the governed and the governor. How many doctors are here? It's only lawyers and drunk people. When you're taking an oath, that oath is called corpus hipporeva. That one, right? It's a series of 60 or so values and writings that emanated from way back about the ethics around medicine and whatnot. So again, we see an element of consent from that aspect. Now, in the Middle Ages, and this is where now the Christian conversations that are coming. Tuko sawa? Now, lawyers, you remember a guy called Thomas Aquinas? There's a school named after him in somewhere in Jogoro, right? He came up with the concept of improving the social contract between the governed and the governed. But it took an element of divinity where he says, and that is what your president has been all about. Power is from God. Mungu ndo anapeana urais. That is what he's been keen on. So those are the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, just laying down the concept of a consent. Again, the papal reforms of 12th century, where they said, look, if you want to get married between a bride and a groom, there has to be consent. And this is one of very few express provisions that we have in our constitution, whereby the constitution says, I think in article either 41 or 45, I can't remember, talks about if you want to get married, there has to be consent between two consenting adults, and there has to be a male and a female. So that is one of the clauses that has stayed with us for the longest time since that time. Well, enter the Americans and the consent of to be governed, the forefathers. They tell us during the Declaration of Independence, we have to agree to cede certain powers to the state. In return, they're going to do a few things. I am a libertarian, a pragmatic one. I believe in maximum freedom for all human beings, with little to no interference from the government. So for me, this concept of ceding certain powers to state doesn't sit right well with me, but it is what it is. It is what it is. Of course, John Locke had brought the conversation forward. But let's talk about the Nuremberg Code. Who has an idea of what this code is all about? Any idea? So what used to happen in Nazi Germany, and I would invite you to have a look at the story of a guy called Josef Mengele, who's a doctor, one of the shittiest people who has ever existed. So they used to run human experiments on people. And one of the most celebrated cases is when this guy was so fucked up, he got 2 twins and he sewed them back. Do you know how crazy that is? So they used to run human experiments on people on the concentration camps. So it was the guys who were outflanked on the eastern side of Russia, where what the Germans would do at that time, they would want to know how their military is able to survive hypothermia. So what they would do, they would take a Russian soldier and butt naked, stay out in the winter where the degrees were going to almost negative 20 degrees Celsius to see how the human body is going to interact. So when the war ended, and the war came in, ended, and we had trials. So the powers that be at that time, that's the Americas, the British, the Chinas, the guys who won the war, they came up with a code and said, never ever on earth should we ever accept a situation where human experimentation is going to be done on that level. So if you have a bit of time, when you have a bit of time, go through that code. It's one of the most enlightening things I've ever read. And you out of just looking at it, you realize that the line between human madness and dignity and ethos is very, 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 very thin. Now, consent in medicine. And now this is now where our conversation starts to get interesting, because now we're getting to very pragmatic situations and something that is relatable to all of us. Now, consent in medicine. And before I hammer it, there's that case of Charles, that one. I mean, the slides are there, so you're going to have PTA it and see what it's all about. Now, what happened here? This guy was in a horse, then he falls down. He breaks his leg, I think somewhere here, 3 times. He goes to a hospital, and during those times, the doctors never used to tell you what they're going to do to you. They never told you the procedures they're going to do to you. So, in their wisdom, or the lack of it, they performed a surgery on him. And because they wanted to try a new technology, what they ended up doing, they ended up messing the leg, completely messing up his leg. Now, our good friend sued. After suing, it was told that as a doctor, you need to tell your patient what it is that you're going to do to them. What medication? What are the effects? Is there an alternative, a treatment that is available? So all that came from that situation. But now, here's the funny thing. After the court ruled that, they didn't award him damages. They said in a classical case, what lawyers do is that you sued the hospital and not the doctors, which is one of the funniest decisions I've ever seen. But what I'm trying to tell you is that informed consent is a cornerstone of medicine. I need to tell Masara, hi, listen, this is what I'm doing to you. This is the process that you're going to undertake. These are the possible effects. Do you want to do it? So a patient is supposed to have all that information. And the key thing here is, at any given point, I'm allowed to change my mind. Right? Saying, my guys, the way this thing is going, I've changed my mind, and that is allowed. I think you've seen this situation unfold so many times, especially after Big Brother Trump took over, and you've seen what Robert Kennedy has been doing, and it's one of the most not so intelligent things. Now this is where this thing ties down to data privacy and protection. If I'm in Migori and I start explaining a medical jargon to a local fisherman there, in those long languages medics use, I think that's a concern for consent, right? It's the same way I will come here and start telling you legal concepts in that Patrick Lumumba's big English, right? So if I'm going to explain the aspect of consent to people, I need to explain it to you in a language that you understand. If I'm down in Mombasa, I need to nikueleze na Kiswahili sanifu kama najua ama sijui. There's of course a language barrier. Some of these things are very technical. To be sincere, I was asking a friend of mine the other day if I was supposed to explain a simple concept of what is jurisdiction to people. How am I explaining that thing to my Jojo in Kikamba? So there's the language barrier with some of these things. So those are some of the concerns we have around the area of consent. Cultural differences. Once you go to some of the communities, northern Kenya, northern Rift, Mombasa, the area around Kilifi, those communities. You know, for some people to be treated, an entire wazee have to be called, and they have to give consent. So if you're coming from, you've gone to university, med school, graduated, if you're a young lady, they will tell you, first of all, huku sisi hatutibiangu na wamama. And these things are quite alive. That is the reality. So there are those nuances, those cultural differences. Power dynamics. And I will let's put a star on the power dynamics because I want to tackle it when it comes to data privacy. Because we need to look at the relationship between employer and employee in some of the situations where you're giving consent. Time pressures. Here I am, an operation needs to be done. I need to make a decision at that time. Do I have the luxury of going to inform the next of kin? Oh, my guy, we need to. So that's a concern. Incomplete disclosure. Some medics have this thing where either because of capitalism or I don't know because of what, they will not give you the full, complete information. And once you don't have the full, complete information, you're not able to make a decision. So there's that. Inadequate documentation. If you're deep in bundles, what happens? Electronic consent. Najua mtafurahia once you get to that level. Now, exceptions to informed consent. I think I talked about the first instance where you talked about my biker friends. I've also talked about life-threatening emergencies where a decision has to be done. I have to do it, and I have to do it now. Well, if you waive consent, that serves as an exception to informed consent. And I found this in the Health Act, and I quite struggle with it. When there's a provision for a health service where a court gives a court order. I have never seen such an instance, but I would want to hear your experiences if such a situation has happened. Now, this is now here where it gets interesting. How many guys are from Jehovah's Witness? No. It's a live situation. It's right. They don't donate blood. Actually, transfusion of blood is prohibited, right? Right? Kabisa, yeah? Their belief system. So, okay, guys, yes. So they do not allow transfusion of blood. But now, because of the situations and the world we've lived in, the Health Act came with a provision saying, look, if it's in the interest of the health of that person, then you're going to undertake that procedure, whether you like it or not. The second, and I'm just going to tie it down to that, if you're going to endanger the larger public. And I'm so sure you saw these situations during COVID. COVID happened, mulikuwa dunda na msee, sindio? You guys came here, dunda. Then one of you has tested positive for COVID. You remember the first initial days, how government used to do? Who are you with? That tracking situation. So it is to ensure that. And deep in Ukambani, we have a cult called Kavonocha, where they do not allow you to go to a hospital. Transfusion of money is not allowed. Injection of the syringe they do not allow. So some of these provisions came to take care of that. Constitutional provisions. I'm so sure kila mtu hapa amesikia ile statement ya the people, mandatory and right? So that is the foundation of Article 1, where all the power belongs to the people. And the people give the power to their representative authorities, that is the greedy MPs, the senators, the MCAs, the governors, right? Again, the same power is given back to the judiciary, right? So it is exercised in all those forms. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the social contract is a basis of consent in our constitution. Public participation. Who has ever gone to Bunge to do public participation, especially finance bill? I think kila mtu hapa amefanya, right? Whatever it is that you are doing, when you go there and tell Mheshimiwa, look guys, we do not agree with this provision where Kenya Revenue Authority is telling us they need to access our M-Pesa, right? So when you're putting yourself out there, when you say, look, this is public participation, that is defining the relationship between the governed and the governor. Like I told you, when I started, I said marriage, Article 45, clearly states, I'll read, every adult has a right to marry a person of the opposite sex based on the free consent of the parties. That is one of the very few provisions in the Constitution where it is expressly written. And of course, my favorite one is Article 31, which you will see as we move. So Article 31, and especially Article C and D, is the basis of data protection, data privacy in our Constitution. So what it says is that that is a provision that you have the right to make informed choices, not to be subjected to the information being revealed. So that is the basis of data privacy and protection. And we'll see so many conversations around that. And I know there are going to be interesting conversations and questions. If I know for conversations we've always said, Mbuzi za wapi zilitamu? Are you sure? Kikope, good stuff. So apparently, mbuzi ziko around the area around Bogoria, Baringo are very sweet. Why? Because of the herbs that they cool around that area. And this called what? That thing where they graze the salt. Yes. So the government kicked away these people during that time to make way for that. And what happened is that they lost their way, they lost their culture, their livelihood was taken away. And they filed suits in a number of jurisdictions, going all the way to the African Court on Human Rights, and they won. And the worst part is that every successful government has never compensated them. And the argument here was very simple. If you want us out, there are a few things you need to do. And one of them is that there has to be prior informed consent on what do you want to do with our land, where are you going to settle us, how much are you going to pay us. So those were the conversations that the government, being the government, never articulated. The Ogiek story is a very sad story because the country we know as Kenya today, the original inhabitants of Kenya are Ogieks. Sisi wengine tumekuja tukawafukuza first the Bantus came, the Kushites came, the Nilotes came, and then we constantly push them away. So we pushed them to a forest called Mau Forest. And they existed there for a number of years until President Kibaki came up with a good idea of, look, we need to chase you away from this land you've known. And remember, the person you're chasing away, that is where their grandfather was. That's where their great-grandfather was. They have no other idea. They don't know any other piece of land they've ever owned. And again, it was the same constant things that the court was looking at. Was there free, prior, informed consent? And the answer to that question was no. And I think you all saw the landmark decision that various courts have given with regards to that. So those are some of the nuances when you look at a human rights perspective on consent. So now this is where this now gets interesting. Sexual consent. Where are those babes? They are babes who give it properly. Yes, this group. This is a group that Azibia does. Yeah? Oh. Okay, so it makes sense. So, consent must be voluntary, right? Must be free, right? Prior information, right? Kumbe mnajua hizi vitu. Kumbe you guys know these things. Okay, sorry. Thanks. Now, remember, silence is not a yes. And we constantly say that in law. Right? Now, if consent is obtained by intimidation or force, or let me put it clearly, by deception, like you guys have seen that Twinder Simpler. Now rings a bell? Now, if you obtain consent through such ways, is it consent? Remember what I said? Consent has to be free, voluntary, clear, informed. Right? Higher. Again, consent can always be withdrawn at any time, right? Do drunk people give consent? So for argument's sake, and I've seen this conversation on X. There are folks who want to have their sex, either they want to have high sex, they want to have drunk sex. So where do we draw the line? Yeah? Very dicey situation. Now, young children cannot consent. If you are below 18, you cannot give consent. And for the reason I'm saying 18 is a Kenyan situation. I want to give you some very fun facts. The age of consent in Nigeria, who can take a wild guess? 16. You guys have so much grace. It is 12 years. Yes. 12 in Nigeria. Yes. 12. 1, 2. Yes. Let me make it even more interesting. A country like South Korea and Japan, what is the age of consent? 13 years. Yes, 13 years. Let me make it even more interesting. A country like Italy and Portugal, what is the age of consent? 14 years. Now, let us go to the land of the free and the bold. What is the age of consent in states? Imagine. And the reason why I am bringing this conversation about the age of consent, allow me to read something here. Not so long ago, we had a judge by the name of Said Chitembwe, right? You had the conversation about, it was called Martin Charo matter, where this guy had been, I think the guy was 20. He was having a thing with a 14-year-old. He was convicted, sentenced to 20 years. Very sound decision. The matter went to appeal. The presiding judge at that time was Said Chitembwe. You remember Chitembwe from Sonko case? He gave out a very funny decision. He said the girl behaved like an adult. Do you know how sad that is? And again, and I don't want to give my coastal people a stick for this. But a week ago, we had a similar situation in Kilifi, where the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions withdrew a matter. And the girl, I think the girl was about 12 years. And the man was around 20 years. They withdrew until guys went online, and I think the chief magistrate around that area was very adamant. We have to do this. No, you cannot do that. So this conversation have been there. And not so long ago, we had an interesting situation within the judiciary. It was coming from the Court of Appeal. A 3-judge bench of Justice Kiage, Justice Nambuye, and who was the other judge? Who was the other judge? I can't remember now. My mind is a bit foggy. Where they said, Kenyans, it's time we have a conversation on the age of consent. Remember, we've been having this conversation on lowering the age of consent from 18 years to 16 years, right? And it has taken a life of its own. We've had interesting decisions. For me, for lack of a better word, those are shitty decisions, because when you go to court, if it's a matter that involves a minor, the underlying principle is always going to be one. What is the best interest of the child? You can't beat any other. So those decisions have come. And the most thing that is talked about now is the Romeo and Juliet provisions, right? You've all heard about it. Where it is being suggested that if the age is not more than 3 years, you give it a leeway whereby the person is going to get away with it. So those are the conversations. I'm hearing Romeo and Juliet provisions. From where I sit, I'm still conflicted. For me, from a purist point, it is the best interest of the child. Now, saying that, we've had interesting conversations coming from judiciary, coming from the relevant stakeholders. Again, on the age. and how we need to change to repeal the Sexual Offences Act. There's been a bit of push and pull, and I know Lady Justice Njoki Ndung'u has been very adamant, and for good measure. She's the one who, that is her baby. She's very adamant on changing some of the provisions. But some of, I think I wrote a few things here. Let me ask you guys questions. Anyway, as I'm trying to look for that document, one of the biggest conversation is what happens, because this has been ongoing. There are about 129 young men who are in custody. And the conversation has been, what happens if two kids have consensual sex? What happens if two kids have consensual sex? Remember, they still want to have sex. So the practice has been, one, the boy is jailed. But still remember, he is a minor. So the conversation has been, do we lock both? Why are we locking one? And then if you're going to lock, what is the best interest of the child? So again, there's been a conversation just still around that area on, do we need to redefine what penetration is? Because that's, if there's a sexual assault matter, that is going to be a key factor. In the modern day that we are in, where sex has taken a different dimension, where we have same-sex relationships, what happens when it's minors again involved? So those are some of the conversations that we are having. And again, on consent, there's been a very interesting jurisprudence from the courts, where in Kenya, for you to get divorced, there has to be a reason. There has to be a fault. There has to be this person, we've never consummated that marriage. I don't have my conjugal rights. There's cruelty, all those factors. But now, the biggest and interesting conversation around the legal circles is, can we have divorce by consent? Right? Where I come and say, hey, listen, Sylvia, we've done this thing for so long, it's not working. Sikila mtu ende kwake. But again, the judiciary has been very adamant on that, but it's a revolving door. We are waiting to see what happens. Now this is my favorite, and I know all of you guys are going to enjoy this. Data privacy and consent. Simeingia hapa, kuna mtu amepiga picha? Kuna consent kitu mmesaini? Let us unpack. Si mnakumbuka ule msee aliotiwa kwa concert ya Coldplay? Right? So those are the situations that you're going to tackle now. Now, and allow me to, I'll be defining these terms as I move on. It's easier that way. Now, and if you're an event organizer or a marketer, I think this is where you properly lend me your ears. When it comes to data protection and privacy, there's something we call processing of personal identifiable information. What do I mean in English? Personal identifiable information is any information that can identify a natural person. And who is a natural person? A natural person is a Njoki, a Francis, a human being. Now, personal identifiable information might be one element or a combination of elements, like your email address, your phone number, right? Your KPLC meter number, your water number, because it can identify you. right? So processing is anything you do with that information. If I store it, if I share it, anything you do with that information, any conversion of that information is what we call processing. Now, for you to process someone's information, you have to have a lawful basis. Why am I doing this? Right? Capish? Now, one of it is what we call consent, which is what we've talked about and we'll deep dive in it. But it's not only consent. There are other lawful bases. And this is where now I want you guys to be to listen carefully. There's a lawful basis called contractual obligation. Picture this out. As an employer and an employee with a relationship, at the end of the month, I have to remit certain amounts due to KRA, due to NSSF, due to SHIFSHA. I have to do statutory deductions, right? But for me to be able to do that, there's certain information I need from you, right? So you won't hide and say, because of data protection, I can't give you all this information. Let's even put it closer. You're a supplier. You're supplying me with information. I mean, you're supplying me with either a good or a service. At the end of the day, I have to pay you, right? If I'm paying you, I need a payment method, either a bank account, M-Pesa, something to pay you. So for me to fulfill my contractual obligation, I need that information. So that is a lawful basis. Now, legal obligation. And I will give you the basic example of what all of you have experienced. Mkikuja, see, mkiingia kwa building, you see a watchman telling you to sign here. And there's a group that has done a presentation here. Now, let me debunk something. In 2016, we had Garissa attacks, the terrorist attacks. When the attacks happened, government came up with a regulation called Private Security Regulations Act. What that act said, I think it's section 43. Francis, is this section 43 or 41? 47. Okay, I'm not sure about the section, but it's one of the 40 sections. And they say, if you are a watchman and someone has to they want to get into the building, you have to get the information. And what information is that? Name, ID number, phone number, where you're going. So that is in law. And let me give you a very interesting situation. You remember the time at the height of femicide? There was a lady called Waheni. Waheni was killed at a place called Raisambu at an Airbnb. Now, because the watchman and the Airbnb operator never took that information about the name, ID, number, and whatnot, what ended up happening is that they ended up facing criminal charges on account of not following that rule. So, any day you see a watchman out there and they're asking you for your ID, just know that it's in the law. Okay? Tuko sawa hiyo sisi wote? Vital interest. Vital interest is not in the Kenyan law, but it is in what we call GDPR, which is General Data Protection and Regulations of Europe. Now, vital interest. Hi, Brenda. Yes. Okay, I'll get there. Okay, tuko pamoja? Yes, yeah. Tuko salama? Vital interest is in the event that a procedure has to be done. If I get into an accident or what, and I need that information needs to be shared. So it is in my vital interest for my blood group, which is sensitive information, to be shared. Public interest, which is the most misused term ever by government. So we saw this during COVID, where government could track you. They would track your movement. If you've done a PCR, you've ended up being positive. What happens? I have to track who was with you at what time. You have to share out the information, their phone numbers, all that information. So in the public interest. Now, there's something we call legitimate interest. We are having drunk lectures here, and it's in the interest of Mutinda to show that, you know what, this event happened, right? So there's a business legitimate interest that there are going to be photos, there are going to be videos, because you are archiving the event. You want to show your people, listen, our business has done this. So that is what we call legitimate interest. And I'm hoping if you're a marketer, if you're involved in any event, because consent is quite dicey. Consent, if the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner comes here today and tell you have to prove consent, for how many are we? Close to 100, hundreds. Everyone has a consent forms. So it becomes very dicey. So if you're going to rely on a ground for lawful processing, it has to be either of those. It's not only consent, but it can be all or any of those. Now, this is where the disclaimer comes in. If you're depending on contractual obligation and that changes, you have to go back and look at the lawful basis. If I'm relying on consent and it changes, I need to go back to the data subject, and the data subject is simply me and you. Now, I think I've explained it 2015 and the Garissa attacks that gave us the PSR. Again, that came after Dusit attack, and I think I've explained that situation, Kabisa. Now, real life case situations. How many of you guys have ever heard of a phone company called Oppo? Oppo told me, I can say by Instagram stories, hey, share. They were reported. And where do we report? We report the matters to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So they were fined 5 million shillings. Let me give a case that I've handled, and it was the first notice we've ever had in Kenya about data protection. So this friend of mine, I'm going to name names because it's already a reported case. My friend is called Leah. Leah wants to travel to States at the height of COVID. So remember the time you're doing the PCR test, the test one not immediate. So Leah goes to one of the good hospitals here, does a PCR. After doing the PCR, you have to leave information so that these people can email you. So Leah goes, she gets her medical information, and she travels to the States. While she's still in Stato, this guy texts her. Hi, how are you? I am the one who took your PCR test. So she goes, this guy texts him, tells him, hey, listen, I want to know you, not from a doctor. Yes, not from a doctor patient kind of a situation. So Leah comes, tells me, Mutua, how do we handle this situation? So what we did, we ended up reporting the matter to Office of the Data, our ODPC, and it was the first enforcement notice we ever had in Kenya. So I'm proud to say I've done that matter. Now, allow me just to jump into this because in the interest of time. Kasavera. Casamera plastered someone's images on socials without consent. They were fined. I won't talk about the other situations because of time. Let's just get to sensitive personal data is information that is things to do with your sexual orientation, race. For example, if I'm wearing a rainbow bracelet here, you're able to easily figure out sexual orientation, right? So such kind of stuff. I think I've explained processing. Now, I think I've explained this as well. Now, and this is now where it gets murky. If you put a condition to a service, is that free prior informed consent? If I come and tell you, for you to get in for a drunk conversation, you have to kubali that your photo is going to be taken. Is that consent? After what you thought, you bought a ticket, right? But one of the conditions is for me to admit you, you have to consent to your photo being taken. Is that free consent? How is it free consent? It's not free. It's I'm going to consent so that I can gain entry. And we have a very interesting situation in what happened with Meta. So Meta came in, at that time it was Instagram, they're updating their terms of service. I think it was around 2018, 2019 or 2020, somewhere, I can't remember. And they told people, look, for you to be able to use Instagram as a service, you have to consent to X and Y. So when they were reported to the European Commission, the office that is in charge of data privacy, it was found that there was no free prior informed consent because that was not consent. Now, if I buy a ticket and you put it by purchasing this ticket, you've agreed to your photo being taken and whatnot. That is not consent. And I want to give you a decision of you remember Wangeshi the artist? Wangeshi had a matter where she went to a gig and they took her photo, and her photo was plastered so many places by Techno. She sued. She was able to get damages, but she was given about 500 Gs, which is small considering who Wangeshi is as a person. So what I'm trying to say is, if service performance of a service is going to be conditional, that is not consent. If I come here at 2 in the morning, I'm really sloshed, and you want me to give consent, is that consent? It's not consent. So if you're looking at consent, look at consent from the lens of a sexual consent. So drunk people don't give consent. So that is what I'm really trying to say. Now, I want to tackle the bit about Coldplay matter. You're in a gig, Dunda, with a person you're not supposed to be with. You take photos of me, and within seconds, people realize that I am in a gig where I'm not supposed to be with people I'm not supposed to be. I lose my job and whatnot. But guys, I'm winding up. Namalizia. Yes. So, generally in a public space, there's a general expectation of you can't lack of privacy in a general setting, in a public setting. However, what to do with that information later on becomes a matter of data protection and privacy. And it can lead you into trouble, whereby if you're reported and you don't have a proper lawful basis, then the office of the Data Protection Commissioner is going to come for you. Now, if someone takes your photo, exploits it, you can call me. You take them to the cleaners, you get a bit of money. if there's a place like this and you want to have, you need to have proper privacy, a big notice somewhere there showing you this is where photography is being taken. You can even designate that area to be, if you don't want your photo taken, you can go to that area. So generally, that is consent from a data privacy and protection. I won't bore you with the request of consent request because of time again. Of course, you have to put your name, why, what you'll do with the information. You give people the right to tell you, look, you can withdraw your consent at any given time. You need to put that expressly, and you need to show how to withdraw that consent. And then again, you have to put it in a language that is palatable. You don't go to Drukana and you're telling these people consent in a lot of English. It has to be in a language they understand. Of course, there are those methods of obtaining consent. A consent statement, website, mnaingianga mnasema accept all, yes, all of them. Choosing technical settings, answering yes to a clear oral consent. But now this becomes problematic because if someone says there was no consent, how will you say there was consent? So it's I said, you said. And because of the power dynamics, Office of the Data Protection Commissioner will not look kindly at you. I have done quite a number of writing on the area of club photography. You can look at, that's an article I wrote at for Business Daily and the Daily Nation. I've also written the other situation about roleplay. So it was published by the Star, Daily Nation, and the Business Daily. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've learned something about consent today. Thank you so much. Asante sana.